September 11th, 2001. A day of grief. A day of courage. This is how that day unfolded.
My daughter called me. She said, a plane just flew into the World Trade Center. I said, no, you gotta be kidding me. It's gotta be a Piper Cub or some clown was flying down the river.
At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston, with 92 aboard, traveling at a speed of 470 miles per hour, strikes the North Tower of the World Trade Center complex. Within minutes, officials coordinate the citywide emergency response. Their base of operations is a state-of-the-art command center located on the 23rd floor of 7 World Trade Center. With one tower in flames, the tragedy is only beginning. It is 9:03 when United Airlines Flight 175, with 65 aboard, traveling at the speed of 590 miles per hour, smashes into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. This aircraft strikes the corner of the South Tower. It rips a diagonally shaped gash from the 84th to the 78th floors. The South Tower lasts only 56 minutes before it succumbs at 9:59 a.m. The dust cloud billows outward for blocks. Victims stagger away. At 10:28, the television mast atop the North Tower spears straight down.
Once the collapse started, there really wasn't any way to stop it. It was just going to go all the way down once it got started.
Chaos in New York City. Power is down in Lower Manhattan. Phone lines jammed with more than 230 million calls. Hundreds of firefighters trapped in the towers. Hundreds more race to the scene. Falling debris from the collapse of the North and South Towers ignites fires in the neighboring buildings of the World Trade Center. World Trade 4, 5, and 6 are ablaze. World Trade 7, the building housing the city's command center, burns unchecked for 7 hours. At 5:20, it collapses. The city's emergency nerve center is destroyed.
Somewhere in that time, and it's very hard to keep track of time during this, they had been ordered to evacuate number 7 by the Port Authority. To this day, we don't know who gave that order, but whoever it was saved a lot of people's lives.
With New York a war zone, some residents walk across the Brooklyn Bridge to get out of the city. Others seek escape in vessels piloted by the Army Corps of Engineers. At 7:45 p.m., the New York Police Department says 78 officers are missing and estimates that 200 firefighters are dead. At 10:56 p.m., police officials say they believe there are victims alive in the rubble of the World Trade Center.
Working with urban search and rescue teams, there was a lot of areas to be searched underneath the debris field. There were voids that had to be searched for possible live people.
September 11th, 2001, the longest and most tragic day in New York's history, is drawing to a close.
the first strike against terrorism as a missile barrage lands on Afghanistan.
We will not falter, and we will not fail. Peace and freedom will prevail.
The Taliban claims Osama bin Laden was unhurt in the raids, and the world waits for the next move.
Good evening, I'm Kerry O'Brien.
And I'm Tony Eastley.
Welcome to this ABC News and Current Affairs special with extended coverage of the first strike by the United States and Britain against those accused of carrying out the September 11 terrorist attacks in New York and Washington. In the next 2 hours, we'll cross to our correspondents in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Washington, London and the Middle East, as well as hear from central players in this drama and other experts. We'll also look at Australia's reactions in the first days of an election campaign, and we'll take you back to your own states for a look at major local stories.
It was an attack the world was anticipating. The United States had always warned the events of September 11 would not go unanswered. Unleashing its wrath, America, with the help from Britain, has struck at Taliban targets and terrorist training camps across Afghanistan. With the latest, the ABC's Craig McMurtry reports from Washington.
Explosions over Kabul, over Kandahar, over Jalalabad. The call to arms from the US Commander-in-Chief in the treaty room at the White House.
The battle is now joined on many fronts. We will not waver. We will not tire. We will not falter. And we will not fail.
15 bombers, including B-2s, on a round trip from an airbase in Missouri, 25 strike aircraft, and Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from warships and submarines in the Arabian Sea.
We are joined in this operation by our staunch friend, Great Britain. Other close friends, including Canada, Australia, Germany, and France, have pledged forces as the operation unfolds.
The first targets: command posts, airports, terrorist training camps, Taliban air defenses.
It is important to go after air defense and Taliban aircraft. We need the freedom to operate on the ground and in the air, and the targets selected, if successfully destroyed, should permit an increasing degree of freedom over time.
2 hours after the first wave of airstrikes, C-17 aircraft began dropping thousands of emergency food rations, medicine and leaflets explaining the purpose of the airstrikes.
To say that these attacks are in any way against Afghanistan or the Afghan people is flat wrong.
News of the attack brought baseball and football games to a standstill across America.
Through the night with the light.
Fearing a terrorist reply, the FBI has put America's National Threat Warning System on its highest alert. Security across all major US cities is already at unprecedented levels.
I think everybody's nervous.
They can't protect everything. That's my only concern.
I believe there's going to be attempts, unfortunately.
Ports, nuclear power plants and government buildings are all being guarded more closely. Here in Washington, the State Department was sealed off and the US Vice President was taken to a secure location away from the White House. And all the indications are it's just the beginning. The administration says the next few days will look very much like this first attack.
To all the men and women in our military, your mission is defined. Your objectives are clear. Your goal is just.
Craig McMurtry, ABC News, Washington.
And there we were, 20 years ago. After 9/11, we invaded Afghanistan, we routed the Taliban, we chased off Al-Qaeda, secured the country, retrained their military, and we left. We just left them to their own devices. And here we are, 20 years later, and this is our results.
The Taliban's advance across Afghanistan is unprecedented. The hardline Islamists who once harboured Osama bin Laden are gaining ground fast as they sweep through the country. As ever, it's the civilians who are paying the highest price. More than 1,000 have been killed in recent weeks, and many, many more have been pushed from their homes as they're caught up in the fighting. A US-led military coalition to oust the Taliban first began in 2001 following the 9/11 attacks, but now most of the foreign troops have pulled out. 454 British Forces personnel or MOD civilians lost their lives. Nearly 2,300 US troops have been killed, and more than 120,000 Afghan military, police and civilians have died in the conflict. As the Taliban continue to capture territory, questions are being asked about what was achieved over the past 2 decades and what the future looks like for Afghans. Our correspondent, Yogita Limai, reports from the capital, Kabul.
Desperation on a scale not seen in decades. Thousands have arrived in Kabul in the past few days. People who had homes and jobs, who led dignified lives, forced to leave everything behind. Angry that they've been left on their own. No government, no humanitarian agencies. Malaka's sons are in the army. She says only the poor go to the battlefield while politicians watch.
We've seen this camp grow by the hour. People have been coming in from different parts of the country as more and more provincial capitals, more and more cities are being taken over by the Taliban. Many of those we've met here have run once, twice, multiple times, and now they've come here to Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. From here, they say, there's nowhere else to go.
To get here, they've survived dangerous journeys, past Taliban checkpoints and active front lines. Gulalai says they moved from one place to another for 3 days before they got to Kabul. She has 4 children. The youngest is 2. Ten-year-old Khalida was in school taking her exams when the Taliban attacked. Many had to leave their dead behind to save their own lives. Shir Mohammad's parents died in the violence. Many here have fled from Kunduz in North Afghanistan, which fell to the Taliban on Sunday. Today in Kabul, we bumped into these men who we'd met 4 weeks ago in Kunduz. Then, the city was a refuge for tens of thousands of people who'd fled fighting in villages. Now we've learned that in recent days, mortar shells landed in these camps. We don't know what happened to the people we'd met there. Most of the north of the country has been taken over by the Taliban now. Those who've escaped to Kabul are staring at uncertainty. Fears that the capital too could fall within weeks. Yogita Limai, BBC News, Kabul.
Shame. Shame on you, the United States. Shame on you, President Trump. Shame on you, President Biden. Shame on all of us. Shame on all of us who call ourselves Americans. And shame on all of us who believe in democracy and the good side of America. We went into Afghanistan 20 years ago with noble purpose and righteous indignation. We were attacked by Al-Qaeda, who was given refuge by the Taliban in Afghanistan, and our cause was righteous and our fight was right. And we did the right thing by going in and breaking things and bombing things and doing what it took to destroy Al-Qaeda, those that had attacked us. But shame on us, 20 years later, for abandoning these people, abandoning these children to their fate of death. You know, there's the great thing about America is our ideals of democracy and human rights and standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves, those who can't defend themselves against evil. And when you look at the Taliban, it's nothing but evil. So shame on America. Shame on you, Congress. Shame on you, U.S. military. Shame on you, President Biden. Shame on you, President Trump, for abandoning these people that we made a promise to. Yeah, we killed bin Laden. We destroyed Al-Qaeda, but we just abandoned these people. Okay? That's, when it comes down to it, that's exactly what we did. And to sit there as president of the United States, Biden, and say, I have no guilt, I sleep at night knowing we did what's right by getting out of Afghanistan. I don't know what to say about things like that. You know, we invaded Germany, 75 years ago. 75 years ago, and we still have troops in Germany. We went in to defend democracy in South Korea 70 years ago, and we still have troops in South Korea. We invaded Japan 75 years ago, and yet we still have, and Japan is a stable democracy, yet we still have troops in Japan. We went into to Iraq, 18 years ago? And actually we went into Kuwait and Saudi Arabia 30-something years ago. And we still have troops in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Iraq. Is it because they don't have in Afghanistan any natural resources that we can exploit? No gold, no diamonds, no oil, no natural gas. Is that why we're abandoning these people, these children? Is there no value in human beings? Yeah. We should have done better at training their military. We should have pushed more for democracy. But we just leave these people to their fate. We give them all these weapons. They're going to end up in the hands of our enemies, and ISIS is not done. They're going to resurge and rebound, and guess where they're going to have a safe haven to train. And you don't think that this girl's brothers and cousins aren't going to remember how we abandoned them, and is not going to join with the next terrorist organization that comes along to attack us? You don't think that's going to happen? You're sadly mistaken, Mr. Biden, Mr. Congress, Mr. Trump, Mr. Military. Why are we still in Japan? Why are we still in Germany? They have thriving, stable democracies. They don't have any oil. They're not at risk of invasion. But yet we're still in Japan. We're still in Germany. But we abandon these people to the Taliban fate. I mean, people who kill women, shoot them in the back of the head, chop their heads off for revealing their face, and for flying kites and listening to a radio, and for educating themselves. Have we not learned anything? Is the value of a German and the value of a Japanese and the value of a Saudi is more valuable than any Afghan? Is that what we're saying as human beings? Is that the message we want to put out as a democracy that stands up for the little guys? We fought a whole goddamn war over slavery to free people from enslavement, that even the people that were fighting saw them as lesser than they were. But they still fought a whole goddamn war, and we lost more people in the Civil War fighting to free slaves than we lost in any other war. But yet we want to abandon these people because it's not our fight. They should learn to stand on their own. When are the Germans going to stand on their fucking own? When are the Japanese going to stand on their own 2 feet and pull themselves up by their bootstraps? Shame on you. Shame on America. Shame on you, Trump. Shame on you, President Biden, for abandoning these people to a fate that you know what's going to happen. It's not like it's a guess. It's not like it's, this may happen or that may happen. We've been here before. We know what the Taliban will do and what they're capable of. There's no mystery. Shame on us. Shame on us as Americans. Shame on us as a country. Shame on us as our so-called democracy and standing up for the little guys. Now, the next time something happens anywhere in the world, Mr. Biden, don't come to the American people and ask them to risk their children to go save democracy or go save some oil somewhere when we won't even stand up for these Afghans that we somehow figured was worth fighting for 20 years, but now all of a sudden they ain't worth shit. So don't come to the ghettos of Baltimore, don't come to the ghettos of Oakland and ask mothers to sign up their children to go fight your war for democracy and freedom when we abandon people that we're supposed to be defending. Don't even try it. Any person in the government or running for election that's for leaving Afghanistan loses their rights to stand up to any aggression anymore. 50 years in the future, when the Russians go into Estonia or the Russians go into Ukraine. We got no rights there. We got no right to stand up to defend democracy in their country if we're not willing to defend the people who we broke their country. Anyway, moving on. Oh, and by the way, welcome to my video. This is going to be my semi-regular video on Afghanistan, news updates, things that's happening. But in order to know where you're at and where you're going, you have to know from where you came from.
Afghanistan, a nation of 37 million people, has one of the fastest growing populations on the planet and will soon be more populous than either Canada or Poland. It is bordered by Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, China, and Pakistan. Afghanistan is located at the strategic crossroads that has connected Iranian, Central, and East Asian civilizations to India. It is one of the most mountainous countries in the world. However, it is also home to a vast network of rivers and fertile valleys, carved out by the massive snowmelt flowing from the Hindu Kush and other mountain ranges which envelop the country. More than 4,000 years ago, the farmers of this region began to urbanize. Little is known about these first ancient city-states, other than that those in the north, in the land that became known as Bactria, were culturally connected to Central Asian peoples, while those in the southeast were heavily influenced by the Indus Valley civilization, with some of the cities there likely being founded by colonists from the south. However, until more archaeological work is done.
And it may mention this, but a little known fact is that Alexander the Great from Macedonia invaded Bactria. Okay? And because he wanted to join the West with the East, he encouraged his Macedonian soldiers to intermarry with the Bactrian princesses. Matter of fact, he married the only woman he married. Actually, no, he married other women, but his main wife was a Bactrian princess named Roxanne. His only son, who was heir to the Macedonian Alexandrian Empire after he died, was through Roxanne. She sought refuge with his mother after he died, along with her child, who would inherit the whole kingdom, and the generals split up the kingdom into 4 parts. One of the generals, Cassandra, kidnapped Roxanne and Olympia, Alexander's mother, and his child, and held them hostage for several years before finally killing them, because he didn't want a rival for the throne there. Also little known is that a portion of the empire broke off from the Seleucid Empire, which was part of the 4 generals, and made an alliance with the Parthians, who became the Iranians, and a Greek-Afghan empire called the Greco-Bactrian Empire survived for 300 years, all the way up to about 50 AD, in Afghanistan, with its capital, I believe, was in Bakhtu, or Bakhta, which is in northern Afghanistan. It was one of the Taliban strongholds that the U.S. had to invade. And that empire, they had Greek coinage, the language was Greek. They also adopted Buddhism, which came out around that time. And so you had Greeks, upper ruling class, ruling Afghanistan, or Bactria as they called it, Greek coinage, Greek language, with a sort of mixture of Greek and Buddhist religion. And that went on for several years before they were conquered by tribes from the northern steppes here. And then there was even another Greek empire that lasted to about 100 AD. That was a mixture of Greek and Indians in this part of southern Afghanistan and also part of Pakistan.
Afghanistan's ancient past will remain largely mysterious. Even Kabul, the current capital of Afghanistan, is likely to have been near continuously inhabited for more than...
And they may mention this, but the city of Kandahar is a Greek colony city of Kandahar Alexander, Bactria. That's where it's got its name.
Than 3,500 years, with the exact origin and people who built it unknown. Sometime during the 7th century BC, the Medes, a northern Iranian people, were the first to conquer and unite this land under their rule, which lasted approximately a little over a century. They were overthrown by the closely related Achaemenid Persians, who divided the empire up into satrapies, or provinces. By the time of the conquests of Alexander the Great, Persian people, language, culture, and religion were prevalent in what is now Afghanistan, with sizable Buddhist and Greek minorities who the Persians had resettled from their western provinces in the preceding centuries. Alexander faced some of the most formidable resistance of his conquests in Bactria, which is likely the primary reason he married the Bactrian princess Roxana, with whom he had a son, also named Alexander, which secured the allegiance of much of the Bactrian nobility and people, and access to India through the strategically important Khyber Pass. Alexander also founded several Greek colonies in the region that later became important political, commercial, and military centers. The Macedonian general Seleucus and his descendants ruled over much of the eastern portion of Alexander's empire in the years following his death at the age of 32. Control over Bactria and the Indus River Valley was tenuous at best. Before 300 BC, much of this territory had been lost to the Indian Mauryan Empire of Chandragupta. In the peace that followed the war between the two empires, Chandragupta married Seleucus's daughter and gifted his father-in-law 500 trained war elephants, which he used to great effect in his wars in the west. Not long after, the Greek cities of Bactria overthrew Seleucid rule, establishing a wealthy kingdom that controlled much of the land trade to and from China and India. They were able to withstand a major Seleucid invasion and a nearly 3-year-long siege of their capital city of Balkh, causing the exhausted Seleucids to sue for peace. Over the next 2 decades, the Seleucid Empire was also greatly weakened by the rise of another one of their former vassals, the Arsacid Parthians. In the southeast, the Mauryan Empire collapsed. The Greco-Bactrians were then able to effectively fill much of the power vacuum left by these two empires. But their success was halted by internal division. As much of the army was in India, expanding Greco-Bactrian territory, the king was overthrown by a usurper, splitting the empire into 2 kingdoms, which both experienced several decades of relative stability and prosperity, and the flourishing of a culture that was a unique amalgamation of Greek, Iranian, Indian, and other Central Asian cultures. After the Greco-Bactrians suffered a series of severe military defeats by the Parthians, they were overrun by successive waves of nomadic invaders. The most powerful of these tribal confederations were the Uz and the Saka, or Scythians, who established control over.
So, when you see these pictures of these Afghans, these blonde and red-headed Afghans, these are the descendants of those Macedonian soldiers who intermarried with the Afghan Bactrian locals. Okay, so that's when you see these blue-eyed, like there's that famous picture from like 1981-82 of that young girl with the Afghanistan girl with the blue eyes. That's where it's coming from. It's the intermarriage of the Greeks, Macedonians, with the Bactrian Afghans.
For the lower Indus Valley, the Uz settled in Bactria and largely assimilated with the local people over time. After the waves of nomadic...
Matter of fact, if you watch any village, any news of what was happening in Afghanistan and the fighting, you'll see a lot of times American troops meeting with elders of the Afghan elders who rule like a town or village. Most of the elders have red hair. Now, a lot of that's not natural. A lot of that, they dye their hair red because the rulers were these red-headed Greeks. Because when they intermarried, their blonde hair intermarried with the Afghan black-haired, they became, the descendants were all red-haired. Mostly red-haired. So a lot of the village elders continue this tradition that they'll dye their hair red to show they have authority over that village. Or orange. It usually comes out like orange now.
Nomadic invasions calmed down to some extent. The Parthians then conquered much of the east, up until the Indus River. The Parthian Arsacid dynasty was very hands-off in their style of governance, and were content as long as taxes were paid and men supplied to the army when needed. And as they became increasingly focused on halting Roman expansion into Mesopotamia, the Parthian noble family that had defeated the Scythians and had seized control over the Indus River seceded from the empire, establishing the Suren kingdom, or more commonly called the Indo-Parthian kingdom. And although they ceased to pay taxes, and their king claimed equal status to the Parthian great king, the two states appear to have been allies and deeply involved in each other's politics. In the north, the Greco-Bactrian people and Yuezhi tribes formed the Kushan kingdom, and became an empire at the expense of the Parthians, and then expanded deep into Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. The Kushans worshipped Greek as well as Hindu gods, but gradually over time, Buddhism became more prevalent and was widely promoted within the empire's borders, and even without, with Buddhist merchants and missionaries traveling.
And so if you remember, there was a news story that came out in the summer of 2001, right before 9/11, and it showed the Taliban. They were basically shelling these, there were two statues of the Buddha that were carved into the mountainside. And they were shelling this and destroying this that had been there for like 1,500 years, okay? This is what the Taliban does. They're such extremists that anybody that's not Christian or Jewish, people of the book, are considered pagans, and therefore it's okay to destroy them, to kill them, okay? So that's, the Buddhists aren't part of the book, so that's what the Taliban was doing. It's the same, almost same exact playbook that ISIS was doing in Iraq and Syria. They were going in and wiping out the Yazidis because they weren't part of the book. They were wiping out the Manchurians because they weren't part of the book. So that's what we're looking at for the future when the Taliban takes over and they have all that American equipment that we left, all those weapons. You don't think they're going to stay just in Afghanistan, just like the ISIS didn't stay just in Syria or just in Iraq. They expanded. They're going to move into Turkmenistan. They're going to move in and supply rebels in Pakistan. They're going to move. It's going to destabilize the entire region, okay? Because now it's not just a bunch of hillbillies with religious hillbillies with, old British Enfield rifles and a few Stingers. Now they've got a whole arsenal of weapons that we left there for the Afghan military, because that's exactly what we're looking at, is the Afghan military completely collapsing, the government completely collapsing, and the Taliban coming in and taking over all those weapons. They're not just going to sit there and use them on their own people. Once they finish with their own people, they're going to expand that. It's going to be a safe haven for terrorists worldwide. It'll be ISIS and Al Qaeda reborn with a safe haven. Okay? So don't think it ends just with them banning kites and you having to bury your TV in Afghanistan. It goes much, much further. We have no idea what we're doing when we abandon these people. Okay?
Traveling to Han China, which many believe were the first to introduce Buddhism to China. The Kushan Empire was the crossroads of the world. Manufactured goods from as far away as China, Rome, and Aksumite Ethiopia would have been common sights in the great cities of the Kushan Empire. In the west, the Parthians succumbed to internal infighting which allowed the Sassanid Persians to overthrow them. Viewing themselves as the re-establishment of the ancient Achaemenid Persian Empire that Alexander had toppled, the reinvigorated Persians successfully campaigned to the north, south, east, and west, quickly overrunning the Kushan Empire, and established the Kushan Shahs as vassal kings of a greatly diminished territory, and were gradually stripped of their military and administrative power. During the intermediate period of Sasanian decline, the nomadic Kidarites and
So what you have also in Afghanistan is that in the West, it's mostly Dari-speaking Afghanistan. So this Dari Persian. So they identify, and they're also Shia. In the rest, with all the Taliban, is all Sunni. So they're afraid of Iranian influence stepping in. So this is why a lot of them are showing their allegiance to the Taliban. It's just like it's almost exact copy of what happened in Iraq. That the government in Iraq was the population 60% Shia, Iranian Shia, and the government was dominated by the Shia with Maliki, and they were abusing the Sunnis. So when ISIS came rolling in, it wasn't like they were conquering an area, they were liberating an area. These people, every town threw open their gates, welcoming the Taliban because they were fellow Sunnis, and this is exactly the same thing that's happening in Afghanistan. Okay?
And then Hephthalites gained control over the eastern portion of the empire, and like the Yuezhi before them, they largely adopted much of the local culture before being reconquered by the Sasanians. It was during Sasanian rule that the first recorded instance of the term Afghan was made in reference to the people inhabiting the mountainous eastern provinces of the empire, and is likely derived from the Pashtun ethnic group, which is the largest in Afghanistan. By the time of this region's conquest by the Arab caliphates, Buddhism and the Persian Zoroastrian faith were the dominant religions in the land that proved difficult to control. Whenever a large Arab army left, the locals would rebel and revert to their ancient customs and self-rule. In the east, Kabul managed to remain an independent, wealthy city-state, controlling trade through the Khyber Pass to India, ruled over by Buddhists and Hindus. It was not until the late 9th century that the Safarid dynasty, founded by a Persian coppersmith born in southwestern Afghanistan, successfully rebelled against the Abbasid Caliphate and firmly established local rule, that Afghans began to convert to Islam, which the dynasty widely promoted. The Safarids were overthrown by the Samanid Empire, whose rulers claimed descent from the Sasanian Persians, and extensively promoted Persian culture and Islam throughout the empire. They made the mistake of utilizing Turkic slave soldiers, which in time overthrew them and established the Ghaznavid dynasty. Based out of the city of Ghazna in eastern Afghanistan, they continued the policies of promoting Islam and Persian culture, particularly among the nomadic Turkic tribes that were settled within the empire. The Ghaznavids were greatly weakened by conflict with the Seljuk Turk Empire, which allowed for their overthrow by the native Ghurid dynasty, which had recently converted from Buddhism to Islam, and were possibly of Pashtun descent. During the reign of Sultan Ghiyath al-Din Muhammad, the Ghurid Sultanate became a major world power, stretching from the Iranian plateau to Bengal in the east. However, after Ghiyath al-Din's death, the empire fell into infighting, and was rapidly conquered by both the Delhi Sultanate in India and the Empire of Khorasan, both of Turkic Mamluk origin. Only 15 years after their conquest of the Ghurid Sultanate, Khorasan was overrun by the Mongol Empire of Genghis Khan, who frequently massacred the populations of cities that did not immediately surrender. The Mongol Empire split into several successor states not long after their conquest of the region. The Il Khanate, as the name coincidentally implies, fell ill and was ravaged by the plague, wiping out much of the Mongol royal family and army. And as the Il Khanate fragmented into many small states, the Tajik vassal princes of Herat established a sizable kingdom for a short time. All of these small states were conquered by the Turco-Mongol warlord Tamerlane, who inflicted even greater slaughter and destruction throughout the Near East than the Mongols had done a few generations before. Timur frequently used Afghanistan as his base of operations, and his descendants moved the capital from Samarkand to Herat. The century following Timur's death began with peace and prosperity and ended with internal strife and civil war, with its territory being lost to the Uzbeks in the north, the Safavid Persians in the west, and in the southeast the emergent Mughal Empire, which would go on to conquer most of India, claiming descent from Timur and Genghis Khan. Throughout the 17th century, Afghanistan became a largely autonomous buffer zone between the powerful Safavid and Mughal empires. In 1709, the Pashtun Hotak dynasty successfully rebelled and established a short-lived empire by conquering a great deal of Iranian territory. The Safavid Empire was overthrown by the soldier of fortune Nader Shah. He was the son of a common herdsman and one of the most brilliant military strategists ever to have lived. He reconquered Afghanistan and defeated Ottoman and Mughal armies, but his reign was brought short when he was assassinated at the age of 48. One of his cavalry commanders, Ahmad Shah Durrani, was a Pashtun and returned to his homeland, where a Pashtun tribal confederation selected him as their leader. He used his military experience to great effect, conquering those cities that did not join his cause in Afghanistan. And during his long 25-year reign, he successfully campaigned in India 3 times against the Marathas and Mughals, and even sacked their capital city of Delhi in 1757. The Durrani Empire is considered the foundation of the modern state of Afghanistan, and Ahmad Shah Durrani as the father of the nation. The empire declined after they were defeated by the Sikhs and driven out of the Indian subcontinent. However, the greatest factor influencing their decline may have been economic, as trade was cut off to China due to poor diplomatic relations, and the traffic along the ancient land trade routes connecting India, Iran, and Central Asia all but disappeared. This was due to the expansion of the Russian Empire into Central Asia and the dominance of the British East India Company over maritime trade, leaving Afghanistan in a more isolated state than it had been in over 2,000 years, but also a more unified one, with the majority of the country practicing the same religion, Sunni Islam, and the concept of a national Afghan identity became prevalent, regardless of tribal or ethnic affiliation. The Durrani were overthrown by Dost Muhammad Khan, who established the Emirate of Afghanistan. The British, who had largely gained control over India and its revenue, feared that the Russians would take Afghanistan and use it as a staging ground to take India from them. So to preempt the Russians, they invaded instead, and reinstalled the deposed Durrani king on the throne, who was widely disliked. After encountering minimal resistance to their conquest and occupation of the country, the British withdrew most of their troops back to India. The remaining British occupying force was then ambushed and was almost completely slaughtered as they attempted to retreat from the country. In an event that shocked Great Britain and the Western world, the Afghans then reinstated Dost Muhammad Khan on the throne of the country. Nearly 4 decades after the first invasion, the British invaded again. A peace was concluded after both sides suffered heavy casualties. Afghanistan became a British protectorate, with the Afghans maintaining complete self-rule, and the British handling their foreign affairs, which they didn't do too much of anyways. Namely, no cadoodling with the Ruskies. 40 years later, in a third Anglo-Afghan war, 120,000 Afghans invaded India. After a few brief clashes with the British, a treaty was made where Afghanistan would be internationally recognized as a fully independent state. A few years later, in 1926, the country was reformed into the Kingdom of Afghanistan and began the process of modernization and increased contacts with the outside world. In 1973, the monarchy was overthrown in a bloodless coup d'etat by the king's cousin.
You see that? In the 1960s, women in Afghanistan were wearing skirts and having long hair. You see that?
Mohammed Daoud Khan, who became the president of a single-party republic, who further sought to modernize the country and received aid from the Soviet Union and the United States, who both tried to curry influence over the country. In 1978, Daoud and many of his family members were assassinated during a communist coup d'etat, establishing the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. This Soviet-backed government pushed wide-ranging reforms that sought to modernize and abolish most traditional and religious societal structures. This caused widespread insurrection and Soviet involvement in a long war of attrition that nearly lasted 10 years, and caused millions of refugees to leave the country. A few years after the Soviet Union withdrew their forces, the Islamic State of Afghanistan overthrew the government and took over the cities, which was largely overthrown by the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan in 1996, which established a totalitarian rule. They were removed from...
There's the Buddhist structures I was talking about, the Taliban destroyed. See, there's the result. They shelled it and blew it up. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at an Islamic state of intolerance. Okay? It's the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. It's no different than what you have the Islamic, state in Syria and Iraq. It's no difference. Okay? So what you're going to have is, when the Taliban finishes off what's left of the pro-American side, is you're going to have all of these, terrorists from Europe, from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from Syria, streaming into Afghanistan, having free reign to get training and aid, and we're going to be right back where we were before.
Power 5 years later by U.S. coalition forces and the Northern Alliance, and established the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan in 2004. Let me know in the comments of what you believe the future holds for Afghanistan. Also, let me know in the comments of what you found most interesting about Afghan history. This has been Epimetheus. Remember to...
Anyway, that was a very, very good summary of the history of Afghanistan. I really like that. But remember, this is how we got into Afghanistan.
To follow the capture and killing of Osama bin Laden now nearly a week after we learned of his death. I want to bring in Martha Raddatz at the Pentagon, where today it was released 5 videos of Osama bin Laden, the part of a treasure trove of material that they gathered from this home. And Martha, you and I were talking just moments ago, historic in nature, the amount of material they were able to gather.
It is the single largest collection of material from a senior terrorist ever. As you said, it's historic, it's generational. They've never seen anything like this. There are 5 videos they released today, and clearly they want to release these videos to prove even further that this was Osama bin Laden. What you're looking at right now is Osama bin Laden. There he is, huddled in a blanket, a wool cap on his head, his beard gray, watching images of himself. You see him actually surfing through different channels. I know Al Jazeera was up, some other channels. They did have a satellite dish on the roof. In this video, Osama bin Laden actually tells the cameraman to move the camera around. But as soon as the video starts, the videos of Osama bin Laden himself begin, whatever channel he is watching. They do not know when this video was made, but they do know that clearly he had television, he had a satellite dish, and was very interested in watching himself. I'll tell you another really interesting fact here, David, is we reported very early this week that Osama bin Laden was known to be dyeing his beard. He apparently just dyed his beard to cover the gray for the videos to the American people and to others with threats. That's what you're looking at now. For the videos, he is doing his same message to America that he has for so many years. They don't know when most of them were taped, but they do know the first one was between October and November of 2010. So just last year he was making these videos. Again, they don't know when the other ones were ever going to be released or not.
So just to talk to viewers through this again, Martha, we're looking at 2 pieces of video, one right now airing with bin Laden actually looking at himself on television, extraordinary for a couple of reasons. First of all, we have never seen him like this before, exposed in video and captured like this, but also because right there you can see his beard is white, it's gray. And as you point out, Martha, the other video that addressed to the American people, his beard is darkened, as you can see right there. When do we believe this address was taped?
Well, the address with the dyed beard, they believe, between October and November 2010. The other 4 that they released, they do not know when they were made. They don't know when the video, the one we're looking at now with the gray beard, was made. But I can also tell you this, they said today, when he was shot and killed last Sunday, his beard was gray. So clearly very concerned about his image. They also don't know exactly where this video we're watching was made, although all you have to do is think about the fact that they don't believe he had left that compound in 5 years at least. So I think they suspect this was in the compound somewhere. They don't want to say that absolutely, but I would say evidence points to that.
Not lost on anyone who's watching at home that there's no audio attached to these videos, particularly the one where he's addressing the camera directly. Did the Pentagon offer a reason for that? Do they have the audio?
They do have the audio. They don't want to promote his propaganda, they said, so they killed the audio on this. They just don't want that message to get out any more of what bin Laden was trying to say, but they said you could pretty much guess the types of things he was trying to say. But again, no sort of timestamp on it. No idea when the others were made or whether he planned on releasing those every so often as he has in the past.
And Martha, there have been so many questions since we first began reporting this story last Sunday night around midnight Eastern time about whether or not people actually believe that he was captured and killed. We haven't seen those images. There was debate at the White House all week long about whether those images would be released. We know late in the week the president saying for now they will not be released. They don't want to inflame parts of the Arab world by releasing those images. Is it believed that these images we're seeing right now will help quell some of those questions?
I think that's exactly right, David, because where else could you find videos like this? Where else could you find images like this if Osama bin Laden was not there? And there's one terrific fact they gave today about the DNA evidence. They said there is 1 in 11.8 quadrillion chances it is false. So they are so absolutely positive the man they killed last Sunday was Osama bin Laden, and they just want to give this evidence to tell more. They also said today the evidence is showing without question that Osama bin Laden was not only a strategic leader, but a tactical leader and an operational leader. He was still very, very active in running al-Qaeda, and they are running down all the evidence they're gathering. Of course, they want to find out if there was any imminent threat. I think you'll see a lot of action over the next few months, looking for other al-Qaeda leaders, looking for other al-Qaeda operatives. This is just incredible.
Just the beginning, Martha. As you mentioned, we should wrap up for our viewers at home. 5 new videos released today by the Pentagon. Videos of Osama bin Laden captured, confiscated from that home in Pakistan.
So the reason he was in Afghanistan is because they had to kill him in Pakistan and he was hiding there, is because we were in Afghanistan. We had the maximum pressure looking for him all over Afghanistan, so he wasn't given a safe haven in Afghanistan. If we had withdrawn, after like 3 or 4 years, he would have moved back to Afghanistan from Pakistan, okay? So what we're looking at is once the Taliban regains, and don't forget that, Osama bin Laden married a relative of the head of the Taliban, Muhammad, whatever his name was. And so there was a very close relationship between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. It's not like Al-Qaeda and the Taliban were two separate entities that had their own philosophies. They were basically integrated. It's just basically the Taliban was like the local government for Afghanistan, and Al-Qaeda was the international terrorist network that had a free reign and base in Afghanistan. And remember, out of Afghanistan is where they planned the attacks on the coal in the destroyer in Yemen. They did the bombings of the U.S. embassy in Nairobi, Kenya, and in Tanzania. They trained the individuals who attacked on 9/11, all came to Afghanistan and trained in Afghanistan, okay, for many, many months. This is why they had to go get new passports to basically get rid of the visa stamps showing that they had traveled to Afghanistan so they could get into the United States. So what we're doing is giving safe haven for future terrorists to come and get us. Okay? It's just like if we just let Syria fall or let Iraq fall and let the cards, be as they may. They're not going to stop there. You have to have the pressure on constantly for them not to stop, because they're not going to stop. Okay? They're going to keep attacking us. In the Philippines, they have ISIS terrorists trained in Afghanistan. In Bali, the guys who bombed Bali in Indonesia were trained in Afghanistan. Okay? The people who attacked, ISIS, basically, the guy who started ISIS was a fan of bin Laden and a fan of Al-Qaeda, and he wanted to join Al-Qaeda, and that's what he did. But his methods became even more than bin Laden could handle, and they had to ostracize him. So he became even more aggressive after getting thrown out of Al-Qaeda, and he moved to Iraq to start that. And then what happened is after the Iraqi invasion, you had former members of the Ba'athist Party join up with former Al-Qaeda members, and they created ISIS, and they recruited people in Syria and in Europe And that became the basis of ISIS. You never really saw the front men for ISIS. And they're still there. They're still working their magic. And if you give them a free, safe haven in Afghanistan, it's going to be more of the same. So shame on you, President Biden. Shame on you, President Trump. Shame on you, U.S. military, for abandoning the Afghan people that once we went in and did our business and, you know, it's time to go home. No. Well, this is what we need in Afghanistan. We need a military presence at all the military airports and bases. We need special forces on call, ready to go within like 30 minutes to attack anybody. We need heavy drone, drones working Afghanistan, going after Taliban leaders, and we need Rangers inside the Afghan military supporting them and helping them win the war against the Taliban. Because we just thought, okay, we'll give these guys a bunch of guns, run these little, goat herders through some training, and they'll be able to take care of themselves. No, that's not the way it works. Okay? See, what Biden is looking at is the model that happened against the fight in ISIS in Iraq. But we don't have a stable government there. We don't have a stable military that's willing to fight. And you saw that even going after them. We still needed to send in special forces. We still needed drone attacks. The Russians bombed the hell out of them. We bombed the hell out of them. But if we're not going to do any of that in Afghanistan, we're just abandoning them to their fate. And shame on us for abandoning them. That's not the America that I signed up for. That's not the freedom and democracy that I fight for. Shame on America for abandoning the Afghan people. Shame on us. Because we all know what's going to happen. It's going to end up with our allies getting their heads chopped off, executed, tortured in prisons, and no one's ever going to trust us again. Because they'll see what we did, how we let go of the Afghans and abandoned them, and no one ever is going to want to literally stick their neck out for us again after they see what happens and what's going to happen to all our allies in Afghanistan. Congratulations, America. We just signed our own death warrant. All right, I'm going to keep talking about this. Good night.